بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So now here we're continuing in the story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the amazing miraculous victory of Badr. And so today we're going to see how while Badr was a victory, it's just the beginning of many years of struggles that the believers would go through, simply because they are establishing a new reality of social order, and it's very much against what there are Arabia-wide some agreements about class tribalism. So you have the class system in the tribe, and then you have the issue of idol worship. So pretty much in Arabia, outside of the Jewish tribes, those are systems. And so the Prophet ﷺ has this new way of living that is quite different from that. And so while there were many that were hoping for the Muslims to lose at Badr, the Muslims were just to begin this path of struggle and difficulty. So for sure, there were many victories, many important goals that were achieved at Badr. The first and single most important thing is that all these Muslims are new to Islam. They're new to this new kind of bond of faith where people of different class levels, different tribes are all together, and they're working together on an even playing field where only God knows what's in their hearts. So the first victory and the first important goal that's being achieved here is the increase in their faith and their morale. You know, the believers now feel like, we see the results, something we could not have imagined. That is a small group of like 300 men who weren't really prepared for an actual proper battle, as it were, overcame a very well-equipped army of 1,000 and not only killed over 70 of them, but then took probably more than 100 as captives. And so it was an amazing morale raise. And remember, there are, including the Prophet ﷺ's daughter and others, there are people in Mecca who are Muslim, and they didn't find the means or the ability or the strength to migrate. So now these people are feeling like hope is in front of us. This is, a sign from God. So their strength was increased as believers. Now they are learning the ropes of the military angle. These are people who many of them have never fought. And so that is something very important, seeing what's to come in the future of the Muslims, considering how people feel about the growth of Islam in Arabia. 5 of the top leaders and considered great warriors of Quraysh were killed in the Battle of Badr. And this really hit people. And then even there are stories that many of the polytheists actually embraced Islam. Some of the captives embraced Islam. Before the battle even started, a couple of them came over to the Muslims and said, we're with you. And some scholars interpret that as they were already secretly Muslim, but they just needed to get there in peace. So as we know, Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, there's some conflicting reports. Was he secretly hiding his Islam or not? So you have some reports by Abu Rafi' himself where he was saying that I believe that Abbas was a Muslim, but he was hiding it. He was kind of working as a spy. And then you have other reports that show that he actually, for example, in the Battle of Badr, after Abbas was taken captive and they found him, the Prophet ﷺ interrogated him, how are you going to ransom yourself? And then miraculously, the Prophet ﷺ knew that he had told his wife, Fadl, that he had buried a whole lot of wealth in a certain place. So he said, before you left, you told your wife, Fadl, that you buried a lot of wealth. And so here, the Prophet ﷺ is interrogating him, and it doesn't look like he's Muslim, and he's not announcing his Islam. And obviously he came to the battle, and we don't see why he was forced as a noble. Some other nobles did not go from Quraysh, including Abu Lahab, to this battle. So Abbas's servant, Abu Rafi', he obviously comes back with those who retreated and those who escaped the Muslims. And so he brings the news to the people, and he comes to Fadl to tell her that, your husband has been taken captive. And Abu Lahab comes to them, which is his brother. And Abu Lahab is sitting there and he says, tell us what happened. And so then Abu Rafi' gets into this, excited frenzy of what's happened. And he basically announced that he is now a Muslim, even though he's a servant, which is not helping his situation. But as we said, his morale has been raised. So Abu Rafi' says, at first the Muslims, destroyed in the duels. And then as the fight started, it just seemed like all of the might and all of the energy was with the Muslims. And then he started to narrate the stories of seeing giant, pale-skinned men with giant swords sweeping through. And then Abu Lahab said, what is this nonsense you're speaking of? He said, Wallahi, it was angels. And so then when Abu Lahab heard this, he could not control himself. Abu Lahab then went and just smacked him and then threw him down on the ground and started to beat the tar out of Abu Rafi'. So Fadl, she was actually the second woman after Khadija radiallahu anha to embrace Islam. And she's been a believer this is Abdullah bin Abbas's mother, Abbas's wife. She grabs a pole that is sitting in the corner and then she just hits him in his head. And Abu Lahab is knocked out and he's very badly injured. And, she has every right. That's her, because that's their servant. She has every right in their own home as Abu Lahab is beating them to defend her property, as it were. And so Abu Lahab left and then he got very sick. He had some probably infection or something. We don't know. And Abu Lahab died a week after that. And what's interesting? We can never, overstate the value of the surah of Surah Al-Masad. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. That happened actually 14 years before this. Okay. And what happened was the Prophet ﷺ was commanded, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Allah has commanded him, gather all of your tribal family, Banu Hashim, gather all of those people together and tell them of the warning of the Day of Judgment and that you are the messenger of God. So the Prophet ﷺ went and gathered everybody on the Mount of Safa, and then he told them about it. And then once he told them, that's when Abu Lahab said, Tabban lak ya Muhammad ahada jama'atana. He says, cursed be you, Muhammad, and that's nice language putting it. This is what you have gathered us here for. And then that's when God sent the message to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab, that the hands of Abu Lahab have destroyed himself, and he is cursed and damned to hellfire, right? And the surah goes on that his wealth and his progeny and all of his pride is not going to help him at all. And his wife is going to be carrying the burning wood of the hellfire as they are both drug in there by the rope of their necks on the Day of Judgment. So the verses came down 13, 14 years before saying you, Abu Lahab, are going to the hellfire, which means what? You're going to die as a disbeliever, right? So between this whole time, between that time, 13 years and now, all Abu Lahab had to say to basically ruin Islam, which was his goal. He was trying to demean the value of the Prophet ﷺ and to call him names and mock him and to make people to see that he is false and his message is a lie and so forth. All he had to do was say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, and then, Islam would be done, you see? And so he died as the Quran has told us. And so that happened 13 years later. So who is the one that is revealing Surah Al-Masad? It has to be the one who knows the future, because as Gary Miller, the mathematician and previous professor at a Toronto college, he now lives with his family. He's an older man in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. After he converted, his whole thing was this surah. He was like, I've read through the whole Quran and it seems like, it all is coherent and it all kind of agrees with itself. It's not, some of the biblical passages seem to conflict internally and it's hard to reconcile. Whereas the Quran, he said, but, when this surah was revealed, it's opening the Prophet up to easy, it's making too clear of a statement about someone's ending, and all that they would have to do is embrace Islam to not end up facing that. So subhanallah, sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in all of his revelation, mashallah. So meanwhile, the leaders of Quraysh are now in Mecca, and they are very upset, and some of them have even sworn, we're not going to take a shower until we get our revenge against the Muslims. And so Umayr ibn Wahab is sitting there in the middle of the area, all upset and bothered and being eaten away at this loss and this massive attack that they faced in Badr, and defeat that they faced at the hands of the Muslims at Badr. And so Safwan ibn Umayyah, he comes and he sits down with him. And Umayr says, you know what, if I didn't have these debts to pay and these kids to raise, I would go into Medina not caring what they're going to do with me, and I will find a way to get in vicinity of Muhammad and I will kill him. So Safwan ibn Umayyah is sitting there, he says, oh, that's a great idea. As a matter of fact, I'm doing very well. I have lots of wealth. So how about I swear, that by Allah, I will take care of your family and I will pay off all of your debts if something happens to you. But I adjure you that you should go and fulfill this most important task. So Umayr ibn Wahab, he gets his horse and his sword and he's going. Now, he's going under the guise that his son, who is, in the Arab tradition, his name's Wahab ibn Umayr, which, because the father, son, they keep naming like that. He has been taken captive as he was actually in the battle. See, Umayr did not go because he has these debts to pay, and the people who he owes didn't want him to go because they need him to pay them off, or if they ended up going, that he could pay off their family with this debt. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go under the guise that I'm going to pay a ransom for my son. So he goes to Medina, he goes to the mosque, he ties his horse up, and he has his, sword tied around his, shoulder, and he's on the side here. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu is very sharp, very keen to notice. I mean, the Prophet's mosque back then, obviously it wasn't anything like the size it is today, but it was definitely much larger than MCC. It was just maybe 2-3 times the size of MCC easy. And it was just one big, giant, rectangular, body. And so Umar radiallahu anhu sees Umayr ibn Wahab come in, and he calls out to him, this is a dog from the dogs of hell. It sounds like, because this seems like cursing or something like this. But it's not like Umayr is some random guy that he just doesn't like. No, he was one of the ones who were abusing and torturing Muslims. He was one of the ones that said the worst and meanest and, blasphemous things against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims. And, obviously, Umar feels very strong now after Badr, and he wants to let everybody know this guy's a danger. He says, grab that guy. And so they grabbed him. Umar goes over to him and says, what are you here to do? Who do you think you are coming here? What do you think your situation is? And he says, well, my son is captive, and I'm hoping that I can ransom him. And he said, and you brought your sword for this? He said, well, I'm going on the journey. I have to protect myself. So they start to go to the Prophet ﷺ, who is surrounded by the Muslims, obviously. And the Prophet ﷺ says, okay, this is Umayr here. What have you come for? And so then they bring him in. So then Umar takes his sword. And so Umayr, what have you come for? And Umayr says, well, my son, I'm here to ransom him. And then the Prophet ﷺ immediately told him again, Umayr, what are you here to do? And he says, I promise you, I swear that's what I came for. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, no, as a matter of fact, what happened is that you and Safwan were sitting in the square in Mecca a few days ago, and you swore to him that you were going to come kill me. And he told you that he would pay off all your debts and take care of your family. And he swore to you that he would never tell anybody. And he said, how do you know this? Nobody would say that. He said, I know this because this is what I have been told. And, the Prophet ﷺ, obviously nobody else has told him this. This is from the angel is telling him this. So immediately Umair says, Ashhadu annaka Rasulullah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He gave his, allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, the next thing is just mind-blowing. Because he has such great rapport and respect in Mecca, and, he's one of the nobles of his tribe, he said, you know what? I need to go back to Mecca and tell my family and others about Islam. And, if you would please let my son go. And his son became Muslim. And then he and his son, they went back and they told Safwan of the story. And Safwan said, this is crazy. You're cursed. I will never speak another word to you. And then he stayed there. And actually, Umair was the cause for dozens of people in Mecca to migrate between then and Hudaybiyah. And so Umair became this great da'i. He was a caller to Islam, and he was conveying Islam to the people of Mecca using his status, talking about the miracle that he witnessed with his eyes that made no sense otherwise. Because obviously Safwan admitted that obviously I didn't tell anybody, but Safwan's argument is going to be what? It's his magic. Muhammad is clearly a sorcerer. He's a magician. This is the only reasonable explanation, obviously. It can't be that this honest man has been given a message of God and he's a prophet, and all these victories and this knowledge that he has is simply from that. That's just, how could it be? Right? He must be a magician or a sorcerer, even though nobody ever knew him to know anybody or learn any sorcery in his life. So Umair actually later on, about 16 years from this point, so even as he is an older man, when Amr ibn al-As was leading the army that basically kind of took the areas around Jerusalem of the Byzantine strongholds, because the Muslims, it wasn't a war, because they had some prophecy amongst the Christian monks that that the Arab leader will come on a donkey and will give him the keys personally of Jerusalem. So there really was no war there. And so Amr al-As began to take the armies on the outskirts in the rest of Palestine, modern day Gaza and southern Palestine and so forth. And they met up with some people, and they told them that the Byzantines are very strong in North Africa. And he said, well, but there are Coptics there, and the Coptics, sent gifts to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and they are not at war with us. And so then some of the Coptics came and communicated to Amr that, no, these people claim to be Christians, and what we have heard about your declaration, your leader Umar's declaration in Jerusalem, we would love to have such a state of peace and security and safety. We're just devout Christians. We're not about power or whatever. We just want to have a place of honesty and justice and thrive as a community. So Amr ibn al-As, he sent a message to Umar, who originally was not comfortable with the idea because they had not shown any enmity, and the Muslims are not fighting anybody. As the Quran says, فَلَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. There can be no enmity except for against the oppressors. And وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. God does not love the aggressors. But then, because there is an allyship and some people are claiming they're oppressed, then the Amr ibn al-As went ahead with the army. Now, as we said, the Byzantines had retreated, so they have a large, whatever was in Palestine, they ended up moving back down into the North Africa region and stronghold, what is modern day Alexandria, Iskandariya. And so they're all there, and this is big armies. And the Muslim armies that Amr ibn al-As went down there with was maybe like 5,000-10,000. So their armies probably like maybe 30-some thousand. They throw around these numbers in Sirah, and obviously they didn't say count 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. They didn't have like some sort of census. So they're just guessing at the numbers. It's a big crowd. This is generally the size of our crowd and so forth. So Amr is having a hard time and losing, the battles. So he sends a message to Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, and he says, send me I need 4,000 soldiers. We need to really, up our strength and reassess our military engagement here. So Umar, he sent 4 guys. He said 4 guys. He said these 4, each one of them is 1,000 guys. Don't worry. And one of them was Umair ibn Wahb. So that's what kind of a person he became after he witnessed the prophetic miraculous truth. And so all of the victories, وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرَى لَكُمْ وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ بِهِ وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. So it says, and Allah was giving the Muslims victory at Badr just to give them glad tidings that they will have fortitude, they will have strength, and that their hearts could become at peace and they could feel comfortable in their faith, and that they could realize that it's really not them. Because, when you say someone won the victory, usually it's because they have all of the men and the weapons and the power and the circumstances on their side, and that just wasn't the case in Badr. So it's saying that all victory comes from Allah, who is Aziz and Hakim. Meaning what? He is the one that has the dignity and the power and the might to win, and he is the one with the wisdom of how to cause things to happen for the best result, which is wisdom, Hakim. So, after the Muslims had returned after the Battle of Badr, mashallah, there was this unfortunate situation that, some of, particularly Banu Qaynuqa', the Jewish tribe that was there in Medina and kind of had a very strong influence in the marketplace, they were very upset. They were actually predicting and telling people, kind of building this momentum that after the Quraysh destroy the Muslims, obviously in this battle, then we need to go back to Aus and Khazraj and our allegiances and so forth. And so when Zayd ibn Haritha came back first saying, they were even mocking him, saying he's just a slave man that's mad. Look at how he's acting. Because, of course, Zayd ibn Haritha is excited as heck. He is so elated. So he's coming there, yeah, we've won the Muslims, and he's all by himself because he came in front of everyone, right? So then, for whatever reason, some of the Jews from Banu Qaynuqa', they pictured that he's some crazy madman and he's by himself. So this is not what the case is. So, there was already some hypocrites because their close family member became Muslim, and some of them were trying to work as spies for Banu Qaynuqa', but they not necessarily, they hated Islam and the Muslims, but they wanted to just, keep their interests, their worldly interests going. But now hypocrisy is growing, as some of the polytheists, they're wanting to join now Islam because now it looks strong. Islam looks like it has the power and the strength, and the Muslims have it. And so they're not really yet believers, but they just want to fit in. And some of them are saying, well, we have to, stop this. So we have to work from the inside and destroy Islam and the Muslims from the inside. And so as the Muslims got back immediately, this feeling and vibe of weird Muslims who are like, yeah, la ilaha illallah, and they're not really excited about it, but they're just coming to the prayers, hanging around, just listening. And so the Muslims started to get the idea there's something up here. And so this is when the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالرَّسُولِ بِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Right? These people are not really believers. They claim it, but they're really just hypocrites. And so they think they're fooling the believers and so forth, and they're only fooling themselves. They don't realize it. So now you have this situation of hypocrisy. These verses are revealed in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, that they go and they're around the Muslims and they're saying, oh yeah, inna ma'akum, we're with you now. And then وَإِذَا خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ قَالُوا إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُسْتَهْزِئُونَ. That when they went back to some of the Qaynuqa' or other polytheists, they would say, see, I know we're looking like we're believers amongst them, but don't worry, that's just, we're trying to act as best as we can. We're really with you. We're mocking these people by being spies amongst them. So that's also at that same time when the verse was revealed, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. That surely it is that the hypocrites are going to be in the lowest level of the hellfire. Why is that? That is because, it's one thing to say, I'm a disbeliever, I don't like Islam, I think Islam's nonsense. It's another thing to be like, yeah, I'm with you and all that, and then they're working against you and they have a plot against you, and this crooked. So Islam is not forcing people to be Muslim. If you don't want to be Muslim, don't be Muslim. If you have a problem with Muslims, then you're on the outside. Stay over there, and we won't bother you. If you come, then we'll fight in the battlefield. But don't come on the inside and do some crooked, shady business. Be who you are, stand for who you are. Don't be a fake person, no matter who you are. So this crooked usage of faith as a way to do evil is definitely completely against Islam. So it was literally like a week back that the Muslims were there, and then the Prophet ﷺ got news that there was a tribe called Bani Salim at the place called Ma'ul Qadr, the water of Qadr, and they, had gathered a couple hundred, and they live like literally, 20 miles from Medina, and they are planning to come attack because they're a strong polytheist tribe, and they feel like, we need to stop this, So they have all of these camels and all of these soldiers, and they are planning some sort of, they're trying to gather some momentum. So the Prophet ﷺ heard about that from one of the spies. He gathered, all of the Muslims, and they took back out with like almost 200, and they went and they found them camping in the night, and they came, and then they all just kind of went up into the different regions of the, over there in that area, there's some mountainous regions, by Uhud, outside of Uhud and so forth. On the other side, there's these mountainous areas. So they kind of just, escaped from the Muslims, and they left like, hundreds of camels there. And so then the Prophet ﷺ said, they've left their camels and they were plotting against us. So this is a war, and we're taking this as spoil of war. And there was no battle. There was no fight. And so there was a shepherd that was still there with the camels who felt responsible for the camels. And actually, this shepherd didn't even actually become Muslim. But he made his point that I wanted to stay with the camels because, I take care of these camels. And so then the Prophet ﷺ freed him, and let him keep some camels. And because this guy's he's not an enemy. He's not trying to attack the Muslims. This just shows you the nature of the situation and why the Prophet was the way he was, and how it had nothing to do with enmity just because you're a disbeliever. It had everything to do with your planning to attack Muslims. And so there's another, Ghazwat Bani Di Amr, that there were two tribes called Tha'alaba and Maharib that were also gathering together. And the Prophet ﷺ, the spy came to tell them that, there's this whole group gathering again in another direction, and the Muslims went out like 200 strong. And then whenever they got there, the same exact thing happened. They just escaped in all different directions, and one of their leaders stayed there, and he said, I want to learn about what it is you're teaching. And he embraced Islam. Interestingly enough, that guy was a leader of his tribe. And so then the Prophet ﷺ had Bilal become his mentor, because he's seeing him as a black man, as a he's looking at him like a slave. And so then the Prophet ﷺ is teaching him from the get-go that if you want to be a real Muslim, then this is going to be your mentor. He's going to tell you everything about, God and Quran and how to pray and all that. And so Bilal was staying with this leader. One of the leaders of one of those tribes was Du'athur. And Du'athur, he basically came back as the Muslims were traveling back to Medina. And he said, I have heard about you, that you're the prophet and all that. And he embraced Islam, and he's telling him I'm a Muslim there. And he's lying because his plan is to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ. So on the next day, as they're going back to Medina, the Prophet saw there was some rain. And then, later on in the day, as it gets after Dhuhr, they wanted to take a nap. So the Prophet ﷺ found a small tree, and he goes there to take a nap. And he put his, shirt up there, and he put his sword up there, and then he put his jubba, his, outer, coat under his head against the tree, and he's laying there. So then Du'athur said, this is a great opportunity. So he goes and he gets the sword, and he goes over there and he says, who will save you from me now, Muhammad? He wants to do one of that. I mean, it's to sound like the movies, if you really wanted to kill him, why didn't you just kill him? But he wants to do this, dramatic, see, look at my eyes as I kill you, and now I'll let it be known I'm the one who did this. And so then the angel Gabriel came and touched him, as it were, in one of the narrations of Bidayah wa Nihaya. And then the man's hand became limp, and the sword fell out of it. And so then the Prophet ﷺ grabbed the sword and put it up to his neck, and he said, Du'athur, who is going to save you from me now? And so then One narration says that he was confounded and he left away, and then another narration has him embracing Islam, and they're saying that this one is more weak than the other one. I think it makes more sense the guy's going to become Muslim just to see that he was just part of a miracle. So this is, how that happened. So Muslims finally get back to Medina, and the members of the tribe of Qaynuqa, they got a little bit kind of, rambunctious. And so in different dealings in the marketplace here and there, there'd be rumors of them mocking the Prophet and saying, he's a phony, and, that the Muslims, it was just a fluke, and that the Quraysh are going to come back and destroy them, and just kind of trying to just pick fights. And so the Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ heard about this, and he told there to be spies, to check out and see what's going on, because unfortunately, these people are going against the treaty the Prophet ﷺ have drawn up in the Constitution of Medina, in which they're fully preserved in their life there. But their whole thing is they were saying that they're waiting for the Prophet to come among them, and they don't want to follow Prophet Muhammad as they didn't want to follow Jesus before. And so they're just, because he's not agreeing with everything and fitting into their exact idea of what it should be, which is more suiting their desires than actually prophecy, as Abdullah bin Salam said, who had converted when the Prophet ﷺ first came to Medina. And he told him, he said, my tribe, they're not really serious about revelation because they know good and well that you're the one. But they're going to stick to their interests and their desires as a people. So Banu Qaynuqa, one day, a Muslim woman is sitting in front of a jeweler, and the jeweler is looking at some, showing her some things, and one other Jewish man decided to do something, and so it looks like he did something with her lower garment to where when she gets up, like he somehow pinned it to something or something, and it's like when she got up, and then her whole bottom, back then they did not have underwear, and so. She gets up, and then all these Jews are laughing and mocking at her. Obviously, a Muslim guy got very upset about this, and he came and he beat the tar out of that guy and actually killed him. So then now there's Muslims and Jews, and they're kind of rumbling it out. Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr come, shortly, and he starts telling them, and then he heard of the news and what happened. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Look, I'm no fool. I know what you guys are saying and how you're trying to get some Muslims against others. You're trying to rekindle that whole Aus and Khazraj thing. I'm warning you that God is with me. You see what happened to the Quraysh. You don't want this to happen to you. You have your safety. You have your situation. Dig deep. I'm the Prophet." The Prophet ﷺ was very clear and stern with them about who he is and what would happen if they continued on this path. And unfortunately, some of their leaders were just filled with arrogance, and they just dismissed his statements, and they said, and they were known amongst the three Jewish tribes as the strongest military. The Khazraj were getting the best of Aus because of their alliance. And so they were saying, this Quraysh never knew fighting at all. They're just rich, spoiled, brats over there in Mecca. Here, we have been through war over the last decade, and so you don't want to mess with us. We are Bani Qaynuqa, and stop talking about yourself like you're a prophet. You're not. We don't accept you as a prophet. And so the Prophet ﷺ told them, you are now breaking your treaty. You have now made treason against the state that we have agreed upon amongst us. And so then the Prophet ﷺ marched away, and then he told his companions, he made a secret meeting, because he said, there are some hypocrites amongst us that are working for Qaynuqa. And so we have to be swift, and we have to be very clear and strong and stern, because they live in the same city as us. So this is completely unacceptable. So they all agreed, okay, let's get all of the army of the Muslims, and let's surround the entire Qaynuqa area and cut them off. Nothing's going in or out. And they're just going to siege them, and they're going to threaten them. Come out and fight if you want. To see what will happen. And so Qaynuqa was betting that some of these people, like Abdullah bin Ubay, who was, in allegiance with them, he was a Khazraji, or Ubadah bin Samit, who had been actually in the meeting. Ubadah bin Samit was there, and the first thing he said was, I am completely free of any allegiance or any affiliation with these people, even though for decades now his family has had a very strong financial agreement with Bani Qaynuqa. And that's the sense of allegiance. And, so in these verses in the Quran that you misunderstand, it's under these circumstances. When it says, لَا تَتَّخِذِ الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى أَوْلِيَاءَ and all of that, whenever it says, don't take Jews and Christians as political allies. It doesn't mean friends. That translation has caused all kinds of confusion amongst people. It's talking about some political allegiance or alliance. Basically now, the Republican Party has still a very strong element of Islamophobia as like a main political point among them. So it would make no sense for a Muslim to try to come up as if they really believe in Islam, because these Republicans are getting these anti-Islam laws passed and spreading the news that Muslims are a threat to this country and all of that. So here, those verses are saying don't. So immediately Ubadah bin Samit says, I have nothing to do with these people ever again. And he was ready and willing to fight, if need be, to the death against these guys, even though he has this relationship before. Abdullah ibn Ubay was not so much. Abdullah ibn Ubay was very harsh to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, leave me alone, and he started to walk away. And Abdullah ibn Ubay grabbed the Prophet ﷺ. He had put on his armor and everything. He grabbed him from inside his armor, and the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he said, what are you doing? And he said, no, these people, we have a treaty with them. Some people, somebody got killed amongst them. We have to be reasonable with them. And this and that. The Prophet ﷺ said, no. And so Abdullah ibn Ubay is begging him. He said, just give them another chance. They'll get over it. And the Prophet ﷺ knows that this guy's a hypocrite. But he's commanded not to attack anybody unless they openly create, which is where we get this principle in Islamic theology, نحكم على الناس بظواهرهم, that we judge people based upon how they come at us, what they say and what they do, not by what they've said behind our back or what kind of shady statements they made. It's like this whole thing now, Joe Rogan versus Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg and all this stuff, like, oh yeah, Joe Rogan has said some terrible things, right? And he's kind of a conspiracy theorist and said some misogynistic things or said some, and had some weird guests. But those are opinions. But the policies of Michael Bloomberg and Joe Biden are much worse because they actually caused harm to people's lives. We don't know of that so as Muslims, we judge the situation based upon what people are actually doing, not what we think they're up to or what they seem to be up to even, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he's telling Abdullah ibn Ubay, look, that's it, that's done. So the Muslims sieged the Qaynuqa, and they stayed on there for 15 days, and Qaynuqa is waiting for some other Jews to help them. There's Bani Nadir, Bani Qurayza is very within reach. None of them came. No, the news has been out, that the Muslims have sieged Qaynuqa. And so after 15 days, and now they have nothing coming in or out, and they're not wanting to fight, then they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they begged him to. And so they said, okay, but we're asking Ibn Samit, and they were excited because they thought he was gonna help them, but they didn't. Then they noticed he's a very devout believer. So Ubadah ibn Samit, that's it. They had to leave. So Bani Qaynuqa was kicked out of Medina. So now some people picture this and they say, see, Muhammad was kicking out the Jews. Muhammad's against the Jews. Read the whole story, man. Actually, it was the Jews who were plotting against Prophet Muhammad because they didn't want him to be who he is and to have the right to preach his religion. And he gave them every chance to just be good neighbors, just like he gave the Quraysh every chance to be good neighbors as Muslims were growing up in Mecca. And after they had been through all they've been and kicked out, now they have to come back and establish themselves as a state. And so they know good and well what the Quraysh are to. So similarly here, you can't just be like, oh, well, let's let bygones be bygones. These people have been clearly plotting against us for the last 2 years as we have been living in Medina, that they're working on all of these angles and plots. And, we'll go into it a little bit more, inshallah, next week as we go into, just before Uhud and after that. So, inshallah, if there's any questions, feel free to ask, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Okay, no questions. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah bless all of you. Stay safe and stay healthy. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.